Hello, everyone. We'll be starting in 1, 2 minutes, just waiting for other participants. So I think we can start. So hello, everyone. I'm Rodrigo Baranna, Senior Manager at Carbon 4 and co-responsible of the Net Zero Initiative. I'd like to thank you all for making time to attend to this webinar. I'm very excited to present the results of this first season of Net Zero Initiative for the energy sector. And I'm very glad to be here today to do it with Gabriel Follin-Arbelet, manager at Carbon 4, and who had lead this project, and also with Kilian Daly from EnergyTag, who was a member of our advisory board. So we have 1 hour today. I will start with a very brief presentation of the Net Zero Initiative. For those who don't know us yet, then I will hand over to Kilian Daly that will talk about the challenge of carbon accounting for electricity market. And then Gabriel will present the main results of this first season of Net Zero Initiative for Energy. And finally, in the end, we will have some time for your questions. So the Net Zero Initiative was launched by Carbon 4 in 2018, a couple of years after the Paris Agreement signature, when we start to see some companies claiming carbon neutrality or announcing uh, short-term targets on carbon neutrality. So we decided better define better define the concept of the carbon neutrality applied to companies. So in 2020, we released our first report uh, where we present a new framework on companies' contribution to global carbon neutrality. And this framework, we present two different ways for a company to contribute to the global carbon neutrality. Gabriel, you can go to the next slide, please. So as I said, we define three different ways of contribution, what we call the three pillars of contribution. The first one, the first way for a company to contribute is by reducing its own emissions, means by reducing its own carbon footprint. So the pillar A, it's about the reduction of companies' own emissions. Then the second way that a company may contribute to the global carbon neutrality is by helping other players to reduce their emissions. So this kind of impact we cannot measure in the company's carbon footprint. So we need another indicator to measure it. So in this second pillar, the pillar B, we will talk about avoid emissions. So helping other actors, other players to reduce their emissions. And finally, the third pillar of contribution, the pillar C, it's about carbon removals, because the third way that a company has to contribute to the global carbon neutrality is by developing or help to develop carbon sinks. So we have these three different pillars of contribution that have be treated completely separately. We cannot mix them. We have to see them as three different ways, and we have to monitor, control, and leverage these different pillars separately. So today we will talk about electricity markets and how we can account for the contribution of companies related to electricity contracts purchase. So today we will focus on the two first pillars, pillar A and pillar B. So carbon footprint reduction and avoid emissions. So Killian, the floor is yours to.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just make sure you can hear me all okay. Good. Yeah. So I was very happy to contribute to this initiative. So I'm Kilian Daly. I'm the executive director at EnergyTag, which is a non-profit organization focused on reform of electricity carbon accounting. So we regularly work on policy topics in the European Union, advising the European Commission and others, and also in the United States. So working with people in the US federal government on the design of more accurate electricity carbon accounting standards on topics such as clean hydrogen, clean and other clean industrial products, for example, that are using a lot of electricity. I'm also a member of ISO Net Zero Standards Committee. Also just announced today, a member of the technical working group for the Greenhouse Gas Protocol update on Scope 2. So participating also in international fora on electricity carbon accounting. Previously, I worked with Air Liquide, so a French company in Paris, overseeing some of the electricity procurement. So I come from a heavy industry background, from, understanding electricity markets, power purchase agreements, and also performed electricity footprint accounting for Air Liquide at a global level. And I can definitely say that the way we do carbon accounting today for electricity is broken, totally broken. It's disconnected from all reality. Being a student of electrical engineering, when I kind of first understood how we do this type of carbon accounting, it's rather surprising. We have electricity claims, green electricity claims that are totally disconnected from grid realities. In space, you can be 100% Icelandic hydro-powered in Germany, even though Iceland has never exported an electron. You can be fully solar-powered all night long in France because of solar coming from another part of Europe. And this really, doesn't make sense. We need to tighten things up. It's not really transparent, and I think that the damaging part about it is, it doesn't send the right signals, right? It misleads consumers to thinking that they're 100% renewable when they're not. It doesn't send any signal for flexibility on the demand side, for storage. And I think that's something we need to start addressing. And I think it's especially important to address the time aspect because, as we all know, solar power is increasing rapidly on grids across Europe, across the world, indeed. And so that is all about time. The transition of grids becomes more and more about the temporal integration of solar power. And so doing annual or even daily accounting misses this key dynamic of the sun going up and down every day. So I think it's very, very important that we, start to respect the grid realities in electricity accounting, having hourly accounting. You can claim to consume a clean electricity contract or a clean electricity certificate produced in the same hour as your consumption, and also much tighter geographical boundaries. Grids are congested. It would be great if Europe had a perfectly interconnected grid, but we do not, as I think you guys do a great job of mentioning in the report. Europe's interconnector targets are 10 or 15% by 2030. Basically, all electricity produced in Europe today stays within its country boundaries. There is interconnection, of course, but that is not the rule. It's rather the exception. There's been a lot of research done on this topic as well. So the IEA, MIT, Technical University of Berlin, Princeton University, they've all done power system modeling, capacity expansion, complex power system modeling, showing that if we do tighten up carbon accounting, it can really lead to more effective signals for grid decarbonization. It can incentivize new technologies. So we get portfolios of assets to be 24/7 clean that not only include more wind and solar, but also include short duration storage, incentivize demand response, also send signals for clean firm capacity, valuing that properly, long duration energy storage. And so I think it's very, very important that we move in this direction. And I think, you know, the Net Zero Initiative does a good job of this. That's why I was happy to give input to the standard. I think it does a good job of advocating and proposing tighter market boundaries. I think in particular, it does a good job of recognizing the fact that to claim that you're really clean, then you can only get a full credit from buying EACs or PPAs produced in the same hour as production. So consumption production matching on an hourly basis gets you the full credit. And that's really, really important that we start to, you know, value the temporal availability of clean electricity on an hourly basis, not on an annual basis. So I think, you know, it's a good initiative, and it's going to hopefully drive companies in the right direction, get them asking, you know, more complicated questions than just, you know, buying certificates to match their annual demand without having to think about the complex challenges of grid decarbonization. So I've been very happy to, you know, contribute to this initiative. Thanks for having me on the call today, and happy to follow up with anyone either through LinkedIn, or people can share my email as well after if anyone has any questions. So thank you very much, and I'll leave it back to the presenters to get into the details.
Thank you very much, Killian, for this great introduction and great overview of the carbon electricity markets and all the challenges that we're facing today. So I will continue the presentation, first giving you an overview of what we'll go through today and what were the objectives and subjects that we tried to address during the last year. So basically, as said, Killian, the carbon accounting for electricity market has great limits and challenges today. So the questions that we asked were, under which conditions does electricity procurement contracts really help to decarbonize the electricity? And how can carbon accounting could evolve to do so and to integrate those conditions? So basically, the guidance that we produced this year is split into two parts. First, understanding well how the electricity market and the carbon accounting systems are working today, the different types of electricity supplies and contracts, the different types of accountings, the issues and the challenges that they're facing today. And the second part of our job was to build methodological proposals for new accounting rules in order to feed the debates and the evolutions that the markets and the methodologies are doing today. And mainly with the introduction of spatial temporal consistency, as mentioned Killian in his introduction. So I will start with the first part, trying to give you all the insights you need to fully understand the low carbon electricity market today and the way that carbon accounting is working within these markets. First of all, it's important, as said Rodrigo, to remind the full context in which companies are today. So as Rodrigo said, companies, organizations, all players are on their way to reduce their emissions and try to respect a Paris Agreement, which means keep global warming below 2 degrees. Respecting these Paris Agreements requires to reduce drastically and very rapidly our global emissions and our dependence on fossil fuels. So all companies in this effort and trying to change the curve of global emissions, as you see on this graph. So basically, if a company wants to reduce its emissions, it needs to reduce the emissions of all its categories of emissions. And among them, there is, of course, Scope 2 emissions that come from the electricity consumption. Reducing emissions from Scope 2 means, of course, reducing its emissions, but also reducing dependency on carbon-based electricity. So it's not only a goal for communication or for marketing, it's also a strategic goal for companies to be able to reduce their dependence on carbon in general and carbon-based electricity in particular. Most companies are connected to the grid for power demand, as you see on this graph, and they pay a price for that. So there are two main ways to reduce emissions from electricity consumption. The first one is, of course, reduce the electricity consumption. This means measures of sobriety in order to reduce the consumption of electricity. The second lever to reduce electricity emissions is to reduce the carbon intensity of electricity. And within this lever, there are two main ways. The first one is a direct way. If companies are able to directly switch to a lower carbon electricity supply by developing new renewable capacities and to be directly linked to those capacities. And indirectly, if they're able to reduce the carbon intensity of their own grid electricity supply. And if they contribute to reduce the intensity, the emission factor of their grid. So the main tool that is used today to claim for electricity emission reduction is energy attribute certificate. So energy attribute certificates have different names depending on the geography. They're called guarantees of origin in Europe, and they're called RECs in the United States, but they mainly work the same. Basically, an electricity producer indicates the quantity of electricity that is produced and that is fed into the grid. And this electricity production gives certificates to the electricity producer. Then those certificates are traded on wholesale markets and they are cancelled by the end buyers in order to claim the use of the energy produced. And then the certificate is cancelled and extracted from the market. As said Killian in introduction, there is a complete separation between the market and the grid. For instance, in Europe, on the wholesale market, you will have guarantees of origin from different grids, for example, from Iceland, and you will have many different electricity production. You will have wind in Germany, you will have solar in Spain, you will have different electricity certificate. All of them are mixed into the European wholesale market. But an organization, even if it buys one of this certificate, it doesn't mean at all that the grid on which it is supplied is effectively reducing its carbon dependency and reducing its own emission factor. So today, energy attribute certificates are traded and are claimed to reduce carbon intensity, even if there's no physical link and spatial temporal consistency between the producer and the consumer of the certificate. Why is it working this way? Basically, because there are two different ways of doing carbon accounting today, and both have limits to help and to accelerate the decarbonization of electricity production. So the first method that you may know is location-based accounting. Location-based accounting, as you see on this figure, is that an organization will simply use the annual average emission factor of the grid on which it is supplied. And this method is mandatory for emissions accounting, but there are limits to this type of accounting. First of all, it does not distinguish at all between consumption profiles over the course of the year and the day. And we know that the emission factor of a grid will vary greatly along the year and the day, depending on the capacities that are working at that exact moment. And secondly, it does not value the efforts and investment of companies that pay fees for those guarantees of origin and those electricity contracts. The second method of carbon accounting for electricity markets is market-based accounting. With market-based accounting, instead of using the emission factor of the grid, the consumer, the company, will use the emission factor of the certificate, as you see here, the certificate that is bought on the wholesale market. But as we saw just before, this market-based accounting allows for claim of emission reduction without real effect on the electricity that is consumed by the organization because of the disconnection between producers and consumers. And many recent studies have shown that the impact of guarantees of origin are very low, if not negligible, without the hourly matching that ensure that the production of electricity is consistent with the consumption. Moreover, the average price of a guarantee of origin is far from enough to cover the cost of producing new additional renewable electricity capacities and to really accelerate the decarbonization of electricity production. So this slide illustrates pretty well what said Killian in its introduction, is that, for instance, a German organization that consumes electricity on a winter's night can claim for solar renewable electricity in market-based accounting, thanks to summer photovoltaic production in Spain. So this provides, of course, misleading information for the end buyers about the nature of electricity they consume. And this is likely that it is slowing down the real decarbonization of electricity, because many efforts may be made in Spain with the installation of new solar capacities without a real effect in Germany, for the example that we're taking here. That is just an illustration, not necessarily the reality. Additionally, it masks the efforts that are needed to make the electricity network more flexible with intermittent renewable capacities such like solar or wind energy. And last issue and challenge is that, of course, at European level, for instance, the market is flooded with low-cost guarantees of origin, where it is easy and fast to produce renewable electricity. For instance, solar in Spain, hydro in Northern Europe. And what is an additional issue is that, of course, some players, international players, will buy guarantees of origin from these countries, but local players are also likely to claim for low carbon electricity with the location-based accounting. So there is a risk of double counting with these two methods of accounting working together. Last but not least on the context is that it is pretty well known now that the electricity markets and carbon accounting for electricity markets are discussed and are called into question, and that the need for rigorous and ambitious methodological proposal. in order to enable companies to claim fairly the emission reduction in their strategies if there is real emission reductions. What is today, the GHG protocol is also undertaking an update of its methods that were founded in the 90s. So there are many actors that try to give new proposal in order to make those methods evolve. It's interesting to highlight that the Financial Times recently released an article on the example of GAFAMs that are some of the biggest consumers of these energy certificates, and then that are also major funders of the GHG protocol. So there are real big issues and a big impact of this method on the real carbon accounting of these companies. And those companies have different views. Some want to liberalize even more the carbon accounting method, mixing emission reduction and avoided emission, mixing all the regional markets, and some other actors also pledging for tighter rules. So that's what we tried to dig this year and to answer and to give proposal on those questions, which are under which conditions electricity procurement contract could help to decarbonize electricity and could be accounted in companies' carbon footprints. So this is the second part of this presentation of our guidance, with the introduction of spatial temporal consistency. First, spatial coherence, which is probably the easiest part. As mentioned Killian in its introduction, today the interconnection capacity target, even in very connected network like in European Union, remains pretty low. The objectives of interconnection in European Union has been set at 15% of its installed capacity in 2030. So this is very far from an electricity grid where all electrons could go from one way to the other of the continent as easily as on the market. So basically, most of the electricity that is produced in Europe remains in the country where it has been produced. And it can sometimes go to the bordering countries. So the reason for that is, of course, that electricity, like development of electricity interconnection, even if it's a priority, requires major infrastructure. So this is the reason why it's not as developed as the market make the impression it is. So the recommendation that we made within this guide is that the bias facilities and the renewable installation should be on a connected network and limited to bordering countries or states to account for emission reduction in market-based accounting. So this is a strict condition that illustrates the fact that electricity rarely goes further than the country where it has been produced, and mostly never go further than the bordering country. The second main condition that we tried to develop in this guide is temporal coherence. As said Killian, today it is possible to claim for solar power within like in the middle of the night in Germany with solar electricity from Spain. So this is far from representing the reality of electricity production with its different profiles, its different profiles within the day and within the year. Ultimately, it is shown that that only energy certificates with an hourly coherence, with an hourly matching, have a real effect on electricity decarbonization. But electricity markets today are very far from giving all the information needed to ensure this matching between producer and consumers on the market. That's why we've introduced sequential temporal conditions with different levels of emission reduction acceptance rate depending on the temporal matching of guarantees of origin between production and consumption. Basically, 100% of emission reductions can be accounted for with hourly matching, and only a ratio of them can be accounted for with daily matching or monthly matching. Over a month of temporal coherence, no reduction should be accounted for with these methodological recommendations. So that's our recommendation for guarantees of origin, and this is how it should be applied to other types of contracts that are bundled with guarantees of origin. And this should also be applied to aggregators that are players on the markets that are trying to gather different types of contracts, guarantees of origin, physical PPA, financial PPA, electricity from the grid, and distributing them to their clients in a country. And those actors have a very important role today in maintaining a balance between production and consumption, and they are really building their portfolios according to the needs of the end buyers. What we recommend is that those aggregators should calculate their own acceptance rates at their level and use those acceptance rates to the end buyers to which they procure the electricity contracts. As we said, hourly matching is a great challenge today, and it poses questions as energy markets do not currently facilitate precise tracking. Today, the information that is generally available for guarantees of origin is monthly production data. So it is hard to imagine that in a day, companies will be able to buy hourly matching energy certificate. But it is also true that various initiatives exist to develop more granular tracking. For instance, some countries already deliver daily data for those certificates in Northern Europe, for instance. Some standards are on the way to ensure hourly matching. For instance, a standard of EnergyTag or a standard of TÜV Süd. And also some contracts, such as PPAs, already provide access to more granular electricity production than basic guarantees of origin. So there are already some efforts that are made to make tracking more qualitative at European level. What those recommendations try to promote is to accelerate those initiatives by enabling a full emission reduction accounting for those that are already reaching the level that is necessary to really decarbonize electricity markets, hourly matching, and give a positive signal to companies that are on their way with a daily or monthly matching, with a partial emission reduction accounting. So that's what is said on this slide also. We recommend a temporary approach, allowing partial accounting condition for daily or monthly matching. Even if ultimately in a few years' time, when the market is mature and able to give the right level of information, and strict hourly matching should be established. This is transitional, and it should encourage actors to improve their temporal coherence, to go from no matching at all to monthly matching, to daily matching, and then to hourly matching. Of course, this is an effort that should be done on demand side, but also on production side, and also on national side, with a development of harmonized tracking system and development of tracking system of the residual mix emission factor. In any case, all companies should start to transparently report the spatial and temporal coherence of their renewable certificates, even if all emission reductions cannot be accounted for following these rules. Last insights on avoided emissions. So as Rodrigo said in its introduction, Pillar B, that is linked to avoided emissions, should be completely separated from Pillar E with emission reductions. So with this method, some energy certificates may not be able to reduce carbon footprint because they do not respect the method and the rules that are suggested. So all those energy certificates can be used to claim avoided emissions, certificates that have not been used to reduce carbon footprint. The method for calculating avoided emissions are described in other guidance of NZE, Net Zero Initiative, but the basic framework is that actors should use a counterfactual scenario describing the system as it would have been without the project. So avoided emissions is different in principle with emission reductions because they measure a difference between a real scenario and a counterfactual scenario. If there is no easy counterfactual scenario feasible, then avoided emissions can be estimated by comparing emissions from the renewable electricity generation from the certificate with the country's average emission factor. But it is encouraged for actors to build more robust counterfactual scenario and to provide evidence of those avoided emissions by following guidelines and principles from the Net Zero Initiative and the WB CSD avoided emission guidance. Additionally, with avoided emissions, it should be allocated with a pro rata to the financing of new renewable capacity made possible by the sale of the electricity through the contract. So the actors should calculate the financing factor for a given country, or could also calculate a more specific financing factor by using the actual price paid by the company for electricity and the price and the cost of the development of new electric capacity, renewable electric capacities. So that's it for the presentation of today, and we have 15 minutes left for questions. If some of you have questions to share. Thank you again for attending the meeting, and I hope it was clear. So in which order should we start? So what is the difference between PPA and EACs? So EACs is the tool that is used on the market that is really the money on the market to exchange a kilowatt of electricity. But those EAC can be bundled to larger contracts that are made on the long run between producers and consumers. So most of the time, PPAs try to connect on the long run and to build contracts between producer and consumer for several years and to link the consumption of one producer to one consumer. Basically, there are long-term contracts and that ensure for the buyer to buy most of the guarantees of origin of the new renewable capacities. Of course, most of the time there is no perfect matching between the production and the consumption. So it is rare that one only player has the electric consumption of one single renewable capacity. So who are you suggesting are aggregators? Second question. Maybe Rodrigo and Killian, if you want to bring precision comments on those questions, you can add some.
Yeah, I guess for the PPA question, yeah, the key difference I guess is having worked quite a lot on PPAs in the past, PPAs are really long-term, as you mentioned, long-term power purchase agreements where there's a physical a contract for the actual electrons, let's say, usually over the long term and usually at a fixed price. So basically the buyer is taking a long position on electricity. EACs, this is the accounting tool that's used for traceability and accounting. So this can be procured bundled with a PPA contract, usually a PPA contract also. You buy these EACs with it. But also could be unbundled from the power purchase agreement, could be purchased, on a type of a spot market basis without any long-term commitment and potentially even from again, from an hour that happened 6 months ago, from a country that has little or no interconnection to where you're actually claiming to consume that electricity. So I think some of the more, some of the issues that people raise, and maybe when people typically think of EAC purchases, they think of these more like problematic purchases of EACs. But at the end of the day, we do need these instruments. They're very important because a power purchasing agreement in and of itself is not enough to actually make a green claim. We need an accounting mechanism to make sure that there's no double counting happening. Was there a second question also? You want?
The second question is on aggregators.
So aggregators of power or EACs?
It can be both.
Yeah, so basically, yeah, often, so on the EAC markets, there's often like brokers who basically will, go around and gather EACs from different sources and then sell them to buyers. I think, ultimately what we need is something much more specific than that, than just basically gathering together whatever EACs you can find produced in Europe in a given year, and that being enough for a company to say that they're therefore 100% renewable. That's really not enough. We need much more sophistication, and people who are perhaps even bundling power and EACs together in more complicated portfolios that are linked to the physical delivery of that power to the consumer. And again, physical delivery of electricity obviously has to respect things like temporal matching and congestion in the grid. You cannot call a physical aggregator of power if you're in Spain. You can't obviously ring them up and say, "Can you deliver Icelandic electricity to me tomorrow morning?" That's just not a realistic question. And so I think the role of power traders, the folks who actually put together physical power contracts, is going to be more and more important also in the EAC markets going forward as these two things converge.
Yes, thank you, Killian. The third question is on the quantification of the double counting risk. Has it been done already? I don't know if there's been specific studies on the quantification of the double counting risk. There are some studies that have shown the absence or the very low effects of buying electricity certificate without hourly matching, but I'm not sure there was specific studies on the double counting risk. The second part of your question is the guarantees of origin sold exceed the total amount of renewable electricity produced? No, the guarantees of origin, they really describe, they are like the money of electricity on the markets. So there cannot be more guarantees of origin on the market than the total amount of renewable electricity that is produced. But it is true that today there are a lot of guarantees of origin that come from the places where renewable electricity is easier, for instance, in Northern Europe or in Southern Europe with hydro or with solar, and that in some countries you could have more guarantees of origin that are consumed in one specific country than the real renewable electricity that is produced in this country. But I do not know a specific country with that would illustrate this example.